All right, today we're going to walk through the life of one of the most polarizing figures in modern history, Donald Trump. From a businessman to a two-term president, his story is full of unprecedented twists and turns. Using Wikipedia as our source, we're just going to explore the major, documented milestones that have defined his career.
You know, for millions and millions of people, this one phrase, that was Donald Trump. It was the line everyone knew, echoing through living rooms all across America, thanks to his massive reality TV show, The Apprentice.
And it's kind of wild, right? Just that one line really cemented his entire public brand. For more than a decade, he was seen as the ultimate billionaire boss, this decisive, no-nonsense guy in charge. And the source material really points out that this TV role completely remade his image for a huge national audience.
And that media persona, that image from TV, well, that became the launchpad for one of the most unbelievable political stories in American history. A story that would lead him to the highest office in the nation, not once, but twice.
Okay, so let's get into it. First up, how exactly was the Trump brand built? We're talking way before any presidential campaigns were even a thought.
So the source really paints a picture of, well, soaring highs and some pretty deep lows. After taking over his family's business in '71, he spent the '80s putting his name on the New York skyline with huge projects like Trump Tower. But with big expansion comes big risk. Between 1991 and 2009, 6 of his major businesses had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is basically a legal way to restructure debt. But here's the paradox. Just as his corporate world was in turmoil, his personal brand was absolutely exploding, all thanks to TV.
And it wasn't just the bankruptcies. His business career was just full of legal battles. I mean, look at this number. A review of court records from 2018 found over 4,000 lawsuits involving him and his companies. This kind of suggests that going to court wasn't just some side effect of doing business for him, it was a core part of his strategy.
So the big question is, how did this guy, this master of branding and, legal fights, turn all that into a political movement powerful enough to completely upend the entire political world?
So fast forward to 2015, and he announces he's running for president. But he didn't run like a typical politician, not at all. He ran as this wealthy outsider. His whole platform was built around that slogan, "Make America Great Again." And it really challenged the old guard of the Republican Party with promises like building a border wall, ripping up trade deals, and putting in place a really controversial travel ban.
And then, in 2016, the upset that stunned pretty much everyone. He won the presidency. And this outcome is a perfect example of how the American system works, specifically the Electoral College. While he actually got nearly 3 million fewer individual votes nationwide, he won in the right states to secure 304 electoral votes, and that's what gets you the presidency.
All right, so once in office, his first term was defined by one word, really, disruption. He set out to shake up the political, economic, and environmental status quo in Washington.
You know, when you look at what's going to last the longest from his time in office, it's got to be his impact on the courts. He appointed 3 conservative justices, and that successfully shifted the balance of the Supreme Court to the right for a generation to come.
And then there was his policy approach, which was all about deregulation. We're talking rolling back over 100 environmental rules, and in a really big international move, he formally pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement on climate change.
But his biggest win in Congress? That was economic. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. This was a massive bill that delivered huge tax cuts for both corporations and individuals, and it was him making good on a key campaign promise.
But, the story isn't that simple. The source also makes it clear that his presidency was simultaneously marked by a ton of investigations, some historic constitutional challenges, and just constant controversy.
Okay, so a huge focus of his term was the special counsel investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. The final report basically had 3 key findings. 1, Russia did interfere to help Trump. 2, there wasn't enough evidence to prove a criminal conspiracy with his campaign. And 3, on the question of obstruction of justice, the report laid out a bunch of potential instances but kind of punted the decision on what to do about them to Congress.
And all of this led to something that had never happened before. He became the first U.S. president to be impeached not once, but twice by the House of Representatives. The first time was for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The second was for incitement of insurrection. And both times, he was acquitted by the Senate.
Okay, so then we get to the 2020 election. He loses to Joe Biden, but he refuses to concede. Instead, the source documents that he made these widespread, baseless claims of fraud and filed dozens and dozens of legal challenges, all of which ended up failing in court. And all of those efforts to challenge the election, they all came to a head on January 6, 2021, when a mob of his supporters attacked the U.S. Capitol building. That event is what led directly to his historic second impeachment for incitement of insurrection.
So that brings us to this really unprecedented chapter for a former president, a time filled with intense legal battles that were happening at the exact same time he was running a campaign to get back into the White House.
And in the time between his presidencies, Trump was facing a mountain of legal trouble. It all came to a head in May of 2024, when a jury in New York convicted him on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. That made him the first former U.S. president ever to be convicted of a crime. But here's the thing that's so incredible. Even with a felony conviction and all the other legal drama, he mounted a successful campaign and he won the 2024 presidential election.
It was a political comeback of a kind America hasn't seen in over a century.
And to put that comeback into perspective, you have to remember what historians were saying. According to our source, after his first term ended, multiple scholarly surveys, the big ones from places like C-SPAN and Siena College, they consistently ranked him among the worst presidents in American history.
And so that leaves us with this massive question, right? The public record shows us this figure who turned a TV brand into real political power, who survived controversies that would have absolutely buried anyone else, and who completely remade a political party in his own image. History it rarely sees these kinds of contradictions all in one person. The debate over his legacy, well, that is really only just getting started.